The reason that I wanted Josh to come talk to us is I'm really excited to have him talk because a lot of us, judging by the badges that I was, assembling, most of us work in the corporate sector, and that's great and that's super. But most of us actually, as citizens of this country, also interact with the public sector a lot. And Josh, working in the public sector, has a lot of insights into the kinds of things that you may deal with when you're working in the public, or when you're interacting with the public sector, and how you can interact with the public sector better. So I'm really excited if we can give it up for Josh Zimmerman.
Hi, everyone. I haven't actually spoken in front of a group since undergrad, so excuse me if I'm a little terrified and stick to my screen rather than talking to you all. And yes, I was so nervous about this talk that I wrote that down and practiced it. So, my name is Josh Zimmerman. Yeah, so as Bridget said, my name is Josh Zimmerman, and I do operations for the UW-Madison libraries. And you can follow me on my Twitter account that's posted there, but I don't really tweet, so it's not going to do you any good. As a stereotypical Wisconsinite, I'm pretty passionate about things like beer, brats, cheese, just things from Wisconsin in general. But I'm also pretty passionate about the public sector. And that kind of brings me to why I'm here to talk to you today, which is, my title is Why You Should Care About DevOps in the Public Sector. I'd also like to talk to you about why you should come up with better talk names than this when submitting for conferences. But while I'm certainly going to talk to you about why you should care about DevOps in the public sector, it really doesn't help anybody if at the end of this talk you leave the room and you say, yeah, I care about DevOps in the public sector. Sure hope they'd work that out for themselves, right? So I want you to leave here understanding a little bit of some of the challenges that we may face in culture change, and feeling like you might have a little bit of agency to actually do some small things to help us out, especially just in small, indirect ways even. And to do that, I'll have to go a lot farther than just telling you why you should care. So first things first, we should define what a public sector org is, just so we're on the same page. I don't want to get too far into specifics because it doesn't do us any good to draw lines in the sand. So for what I'm talking about here and now, we're going to talk about anything that's really just owned or administrated by a government body of some sort. And there are definitely other organizations that these things apply to that I'm going to talk about today, and more power to you. And these do apply to you. I'm not trying to say that they don't. We're just trying to keep it a little bit scoped. And to make a long introduction even longer, I also want to put in a little bit of a disclaimer. I work for a public university, but I don't and have never worked for a state, local, or federal government. So some of what I'm going to say here skews more to the edu space, but I've definitely talked to a bunch of people throughout local and state governments, and so I have informed some of my decisions. And we should just really keep an open mind about the fact that every organization experiences different challenges, even among like organizations. And you can't apply a category as broad as public sector and have everything fit for every single one. You might say that it looks like a gray duck and it quacks like a duck, so this is just a gray duck, but in fact it might be a goose. And for those of you who don't understand this, in Minnesota, children grow up playing duck, duck, gray duck instead of duck, duck, goose. And outside of a DevOps space, I would say this is wrong. But here we're going to keep an open mind because everybody can be different. Everybody can be doing the same or similar things, and it can still be DevOps, right? And if you want to hear more about that kind of stuff, Adam Jacobs has a fantastic talk about DevOps Kung Fu that really kind of speaks to that. So back onto topic. Why should you care about public sector IT? And right now, we're just going to talk about IT, not even DevOps yet. And I can show you this in one slide. And for those of you who can't see this, yeah, it's just healthcare.gov. And it's not the reason, but it's just a very recent, easily visible manifestation of my point. And I can't show you a picture of something like the OPM hack. And my point is that if you reacted to this slide, even in the slightest, you already care, right? You just don't think about it in the fact that you do care on a day-to-day basis. It's really easy to forget that you care about something when you don't feel like you can do anything to help solve a problem, right? And it's easy. It's so easy. All of the services, or to forget all of the services and things that the public sector does for us, either because we use these services incredibly frequently, like roads and public transportation, that we cease to notice them, or we use them so infrequently that we only think about it during the one time a year or even decade that we get around to using it, like passport renewal, license plate renewal. And this isn't any different with web applications and sites in the public sector. We all in this room work in the business of making and delivering websites and applications for people. We know and we've seen the results of what can be done in optimal situations. And we've even seen companies that go under put out really great and well-designed applications. And the average person has seen this too. The only difference is that the people here in this room, people in our industry, we actually know what it takes to build and maintain these applications. We know how the sausage is made. And yes, I'm a Wisconsinite. It's always coming back to bratwurst for me. But it's this kind of thing that makes something like the way that healthcare.gov was launched really painful and even comical to all of us, right? So just think for a second. Take a second and think, how many of your experiences with government-provided online services have been pleasant? Have you tried to renew a license plate lately? Have you tried to find a very specific piece of information, like whether it's legal for you to burn firewood in your backyard? Have you used some of the internal applications that a government or that a university runs for various internal uses, such as online course material or research? Be critical while you're thinking about this. Were these applications easy to use or responsive? Were they comparable to what you'd expect out of an app that you'd pay for? And if you haven't used one of these recently, can you think back to the last time? Can you imagine this? And generally speaking, most people who work in IT in the public sector, we're aware of all of these issues, right? Especially the glaring ones. Like if you can notice that there's an issue, we definitely can notice it too, right? And we do get a lot of feedback and complaints about these applications, especially when they haven't been updated in a while, or when we do finally get around to updating them and everything is different. And you get the idea because you work in IT too. You get these same criticisms. But we also have this fantastic added complaint, which is, this is what my tax dollars paid for. And we as the public assume that because it's publicly provided, because we paid taxes, that it should work the way that we want it to work when we want it to work. And we've seen what the alternatives are. So it's pretty clear to us that the public, which includes everybody here, does in fact care about at least some of these applications. We want to use them, at least when we need to use them. And it means that there's an inherent value to us spending public sector time and money on these applications, even if on a day-to-day basis we don't think about it or realize it. So on to the rest of the topic, why DevOps? Why am I here at this conference talking to you as opposed to another IT conference? Well, I mean, this should really go without saying. This is DevOps. Anybody who advocates for DevOps culture in any organization can tell you that this kind of culture shift and tool shift should result in better developed applications that are better supported and more geared towards the audience for which they're developed. That an organization with DevOps culture should be able to move with more agility when trying to deploy websites and services for the constituency. But almost as important, at least for the public sector, is that this is a change that in theory can be implemented without additional resources. We don't need additional taxpayer money to buy software packages for it because you can't buy DevOps. We don't need to hire additional staff or contractors, even if we'd be allowed to. Culture change can come from within. And this can be organizationally driven change that can help improve the services that we provide to the public, that can help different functional divisions work together to not only improve these services, but minimize the negative impacts of bureaucracy while strengthening the positive aspects of it. And I know what I just said, everybody's now thinking there's no positive aspects to bureaucracy. Well, I'm going to tell you you're wrong, because this is Mark Schwartz. He's the CIO of the US Department of Citizen and Immigration Services. He actually just gave a really fantastic talk at DevOps Days DC and made my talk much easier to write. Your homework is actually to now go watch his talk. It's fantastic. And throughout the talk, he brings up a bunch of points that leads him to the conclusion, DevOps is about bureaucracy. And he gives an amazing cackle, and then, of course, follows it up by saying, obviously, I don't think DevOps is about bureaucracy, but it does share a lot of similar characteristics. You see, bureaucracy is supposed to do many of the things that we say a DevOps culture does. Bureaucracy in any organization is about oversight. It tries to enforce policies to make sure that stakeholder interests are met, that people in other units are included at the right time in a project and can give their approval and information so that things are done correctly. Bureaucracy, using policies and processes, attempts to achieve a lot of the things that we feel are provided by DevOps using culture as its method of achievement. So these two things are actually relatively complementary. And we can use the types of ideas and cultures we talk about in this movement to achieve leaner public sector orgs that continuously improve upon our bureaucratic processes so that they still provide oversight, but with more flexibility, allowing public sector employees to more easily go about doing the job that we are paid by the public, all of you, to do. So if bureaucracy can be leveraged to work with DevOps culture, it's not the sole problem for us to solve, like most people might think. It needs to be improved upon, definitely. But if we can do that, well, what's stopping us? What's that 3 question marks there? Well, it turns out that there's actually quite a few things that are hampering us. And we're going to start by talking about internal politics and structure. This is definitely, structure and politics within the organizations are probably the #1 barrier that I've heard of culture change in any public sector org from every single person I've talked to. And to understand why the situation is quite as bad as it is in many public sector orgs, you have to understand the history behind it. You see, IT in many public sector orgs, especially at universities, wasn't generally originally planned out, which is to say, as needs grew across the university in different departments for technology, it was usually the individual department itself that actually rose to meet the need, not the organization as a whole. So by the time that you had these common needs across the entire organization, it became clear that the organization itself needed to figure out how to solve these problems together, well, you now had dozens of different departments across the organization reporting to different people, and therefore representing different interests, now trying to work with usually a new central IT branch for the organization to make policy and decisions for how IT would work. So at a university, the structure and nature of even these smaller IT groups can vary as well, to be very similar to what you would expect out of any traditional IT department, and therefore have silos within it itself, to even just 2 people who are trying to meet every classroom and research need for every professor in a department, or possibly even a collective of people that used to be doing that for now a larger group. So let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like in practice. This is a map of the lovely UW-Madison campus. The contiguous pieces don't actually fit too well on one screen, so this is most of campus. That little silo up in the corner, that's my silo. It's a Memorial Library. It's a bleak and ugly building, but it's my nice little silo. Now you're seeing the silos for library IT on campus. You still see my operations group, but you also see our developers, a digital content group, and a group that's in charge of some labs and special projects over at College Library. Those 4 departments represent the tech interests of 40-ish libraries across campus, some of which aren't on this map. And many of these libraries, in fact, represent the interests of different academic units, such as the law library representing the law school, obviously. And so we often find ourselves working with IT for different departments across campus. And some of these libraries aren't even part of the general library system, so they're not even on our same funding lines, which makes things, of course, even more difficult. And going back to that original map, most of these gray buildings here, most of them have their own IT group. So the last time a survey was done of IT on campus by our security people, actually, they came up with something on the order of 140 different IT units on campus. And that's just UW-Madison. We also actually work on many projects and purchase many tools together with the entire UW system, which is 13 universities and 2 groups which represent the 13 two-year colleges across Wisconsin. That's a lot of silos. And so the nature of things in a lot of universities, and to some extent the same way in other public sector orgs, when we talk about breaking down silos or helping people go work between them, normally we're talking about a much smaller scale for DevOps. We're talking about developers and operations, or making sure that your security department can work with your devs and your ops and your other groups around your organization. And the scale is different when you're trying to get the central security group to be able to work with 140 different departments across campus, some of whom have their own security professionals, and some who don't because they're 2 people running the tech for an entire department. And it's similar to the kind of sprawl that you see in a lot of enterprise orgs, but there's a big difference, which is that in enterprise orgs, you're all unified by the fact that your organization is trying to make money. So you have a goal to be working for that's similar across all of your units. And our IT units are, in fact, just doing the best that we can to represent the interests of the people who hire us, our individual departments, which means that we often end up cooperating with the other groups instead of collaborating with them. And people really mistake these 2 things. This is John Maeda, my brother, who's actually a teacher, introduced me to some of his ideas. He works he's the head of the design lab at MIT. And so he's touched on the subject a bit. He's tweeted this. This tweet really just was very clearly on exactly what I wanted to point out. So in both situations, you have parties that are working towards the same goal. So cooperation is actually the traditional siloed approach. You're working together to the same goal, but you're doing it independently. You're not really trying to get to the same place together. You just want to end up at that place. And so you're going about with your own responsibilities and that kind of stuff. But collaboration is really what DevOps is. It's understanding that because you are all working towards the same end, and you're working together to accomplish it, that you need each other to reach your goal, and you work together to do that. And that's really important because in the end, what does success in a public sector org actually look like? What are we trying to achieve? It's not animating. This is Wisconsin's kicker. He has this great dance that he does after he hits a field goal. I'm sorry. So really, how do you measure success when your overall goal is to provide all of the services that the public or your constituency needs, and their needs are going to change over time, and your direction as an organization even might change the next time a politician takes office? Is it a success for your team if you have a working service that you get out that has basic functionality but is so awful that nobody wants to use it? Is it a success if the basic functionality is great, but there's a bunch of other features that need to be developed for the people that actually use this app that never get deployed because you have to move on to something else that's needed? Is it a success if when you get back to that application that had that great basic functionality, that it's now been 4 or 5 years and you realize that the best way to work on this app is to just start from scratch? And then when you get it out again, it's just still that same basic functionality? It gets to the point that if these situations aren't successes, do we consider them failures? It's actually very difficult to define in the public sector what a success or a failure scenario actually looks like. And so this difficulty in defining what your success or failure scenarios are can lead to situations where a team may feel like failure is just not an option, period. Either you can't fail, or you have to do everything to make sure that you don't. it can lead to a team never being able to celebrate your successes because you may actually never feel like you succeeded, which takes away an incredibly basic and important way that brings departments together. And I touched on something here that I want to keep on going into, which is the fact that public sector orgs often have problems with finding the time to accomplish all of the things that they actually need to do. It's really difficult to talk about public sector orgs without touching on their resources. Everybody always assumes our resource issues are due to money. And while lacking money doesn't really help us whatsoever, our lack of time causes far, far more issues than that. Even if a department has enough money or would like to eschew some of the portion of something like their hardware budget to hire a new employee, our policy often actually prevents us from doing so. So we wind up with a limited amount of people hours that doesn't end up scaling when we take on more services and responsibilities, which we're forced to do or need to do because we're trying, our goal, our success, is meeting all of the needs of our constituency. So if their needs increase, so do the services and responsibilities we take on. And so this in turn forces us to make decisions such as cutting service, providing worse services, labeling services as done, even though everybody in IT knows that nothing is ever done in IT, right? It also leaves us little to no time to work on things like cultural issues. It's really difficult to prioritize something like how we're working with another team or how we're working even within a team if you're always strapped for time and just getting things barely done all the time. And so it makes it very difficult for managers, especially, to prioritize that for part of their, for their teams. I told you earlier that I would give everybody here some things that we can do to improve the situation for public sector orgs, so that you can leave here feeling that you can help us in some way, shape, or form. Let's start by talking about tech communities. The DevOps community is a community built around inclusion. And let's be honest, we actually do a really good job of it. Seriously, we can all give ourselves a pat on the back because DevOps Days conferences are really affordable. They happen all over, so everybody can make it to DevOps Days conferences. You might have to drive a little far or even hop a plane if you're in certain areas of the country or the world. But it's comparatively easy to get to DevOps Days conferences. There are tons of DevOps resources online that are relatively easy to find, such as DevOps Weekly, many blogs that people have been very big about. And people in our community are actually super friendly and really help people find those resources and help brainstorm ways for our orgs to help. However, we don't always do a good job of outreaching to other communities that we're not familiar with. We don't encourage other tech communities to do some of the same things that we're doing here in DevOps. Outreach is really important. It's important to let people know that the cultural and technical issues that we all share can be solved. Even if there isn't 100% overlap, our communities can help. And we see this kind of outreach sometimes. Look at the push that there's been to get DevOps into enterprise orgs. There's been a really solid push for that, and it's awesome. But we also have to remember that there are tons of other types of organizations, many of which even have their own sub-communities and subgroups. So they may not even get out of their own communities to realize that something like DevOps is out there. So leaving it to an organization or to a different community to stumble into DevOps and to approach us isn't being actively inclusive. Yes, we'll include them when they come to us, but we should do a better job of reaching out to them. I don't think we should be the Borg like I insinuate here, but I definitely think we can be somewhere in between here and trying to assimilate every tech person ever. And we can also work on making other tech communities that we're a part of to be just as inclusive. Otherwise, we leave people out in the cold. And having healthy tech communities that include people from a variety of organizations means that the ideas in our communities will travel through those organizations far more quickly. And it means that the ideas generated in those communities are actually going to be more complete and representative of tech everywhere, not just the tech in the organizations that we belong to. And the good thing, though, is that there are a lot of other small things we can do as a community to make things feel more inclusive for people. And here's a couple. What it says there, like really. When reading a blog or watching a talk on culture or tech adoption, there are a bunch of things that can stick out to somebody who's in a different type of organization than you're used to seeing, that really kind of just say, hey, this doesn't apply to you. And we can still definitely learn things from those talks, because guess what? They actually do apply to us. But by the time you've seen or heard those kinds of things, it's really easy for it to color the way that the rest of that talk or that blog goes for you. And it makes it very difficult to share with a manager or someone who's higher above you if you're trying to convince them that, hey, maybe we should give it a try at this DevOps thing. So I'm not going to give a complete and exhaustive list, but if you're talking about how you're going to bring value to a company or a business, well, I don't work for a business. I work for an academic institution. It's a public organization. The word business, the word company, carries the connotation that your end goal is to make money. And those blogs do frequently actually go into the fact that the main reason to adopt DevOps is because you're going to save your company money, or your company is going to be able to generate more revenue. But that's not really important to a public sector org in most cases. So if your services are generally the means to making to the end of making money, what you can do is bring it back to the level of the services, because your services are going to make you money. If you can bring it back to the level of how you're going to improve your services, you literally just made it applicable to anybody who's trying to run any tech thing anywhere. It makes it just so much easier for somebody who's not used to that to be able to now take part in it. And here's where I'm going to give a huge shout out to the DevOps Days organizers, especially, and all the DevOps Days organizers out there, period. Cultural issues are hard because every organization has a different set of issues. Even when we think a problem is unique to us, it generally isn't. And the only way we're ever going to know is if we all talk about it. If you're in the public sector and your organization is going through change, well, you need to speak up. You need to tell us what's working for you, what's not working for you, why isn't it working for you, or why is it? And if you have the ability to give somebody a soapbox to stand on, to share their experiences, you should do so. And the DevOps Days organizers have been fantastic about it. It's why we've had much bigger enterprise adoption of DevOps. It's, we just need to keep on going down this road, sorry. And we should continue to look out for other communities and organizations that haven't had a chance to speak and give it to them. I don't know if I've ever seen a talk at a DevOps Days by somebody who's at a nonprofit. Maybe they have different challenges that we've never thought about. And this is definitely a case where we can learn from everybody else. I can learn from a startup. I can learn from an enterprise. And you can learn from us too. Another thing we can do is give people time to actually work on cultural issues. Does your company sell software for other organizations that they install and then use on their servers? Well, guess what? Your DevOps may not end at your company. And the same goes for open source software. Consumers of software like this, for many intents and purposes, end up being the ops team for that software. Would you send your ops team out with scarce documentation or no playbook? If a new member in your ops team had a basic question that's probably in the documentation, would you tell them to RTFM? Or would you actually help them find it in the documentation and ask if there's something you can do to improve the documentation so the next time somebody's looking for this, they can find it? And I could go on. But I don't expect everybody to dedicate 100% of their free time to open source. But it's important that everybody here understands that time can be a significant barrier for people to adopting new things. So if your great new tool will revolutionize my systems, and it's going to take several months for me to actually get it working, it's not going to run on my servers. I don't have the time for that. We have too much going on. So I'm either going to have to go for a pay-for product that might be worse than your open source software, or we're just not going to have it for a while because we don't have the time. And just keep trying to understand us. You may not understand public sector orgs or how they may be different from your own. And that's okay, but work towards it. It may even help you long term. And there's so many other things I don't have time to touch on today, such as private companies generally not understanding how our buying processes work, which lead us to not being able to get the software we want frequently. The fact that we frequently in this community talk about team building as how do you hire in people, but we can't really hire and fire in the same way you can. So the team building we need to be talking about is how do you take a team of people that historically have been disagreeing and really help them see that these things are better for us. And just don't stop listening. Don't stop trying to understand the different types of organizations out there, because we can all help each other make our organizations better. Thanks for listening to my talk, and here's a picture of my cat with a bowler hat on his thanks. All right. So, okay.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was great. We have time for maybe one question, if we have one pressing question. And see, whenever I say one question, okay, and we have, yes, go ahead.
So I have a question. We do a thing here in town called like Civic Hack Day or something. Did anyone go to this year? I wanted to, I didn't, but I was curious what your thoughts are as a public sector employee on like how people can donate little bits of their time to improve things. So like I know they did some kind of like bike routing or sharing thing at this year's one.
Yeah, so he asked about Civic Hack Days. So a lot of cities have been putting out a lot of data and APIs to access just random data on lots of things that the cities know about. And it's really cool. It allows anybody anywhere to actually, take some of their own time and make an app for their city that will help them. The biggest issue that we have with some of those, though, is that they get passed around out there, and if you haven't made a really full commitment to actually supporting that application long term, or talk to the organization about how you can support that long term or how they can support it long term, it makes it really difficult if that application ever goes away, because now it's something that the public service or that the public sector isn't providing to those people. So they're really good opportunities, and we should definitely be using them. But you should also know that there's that caveat that you either need to support it or help them support it.
All right. Thank you so much, Josh. Can I get another round of applause for Joshua?